The control tower at Nellis Air Force Base fell silent at 3:47 hours. Not the usual kind of silence that comes with the graveyard shift, but the kind that makes seasoned operators look up from their screens with that particular expression veterans know too well. The radar signature didn't make sense. Someone had just lit up a restricted training corridor with a flight profile that belonged in textbooks, not in the dead hours of a Thursday morning when nothing was scheduled to fly. The duty officer, a major with 17 years under his belt, leaned forward and keyed his mic 3 times before speaking. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen enough anomalies to know when one mattered. The transponder code blinked on his screen, faded, then returned with a clarity that seemed almost deliberate. It was a legacy identifier, the kind the Air Force had phased out of active systems in 2019. The kind that shouldn't exist anymore, let alone be painting on military-grade radar at 3 in the morning. Lieutenant Reeves, fresh enough to night watch that his coffee still had steam, pulled up the historical database without being asked. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the mechanical precision of someone following protocols learned in a classroom rather than a cockpit. The screen flickered. The call sign resolved into text that made him stop mid-keystroke. Falcon, just that. Single-word identifiers were old school, from an era when radio brevity meant survival and every pilot knew every voice on the channel. Reeves looked at the major who hadn't moved, whose eyes had gone somewhere else entirely. The older man's jaw worked silently before he spoke, barely above a whisper, as if saying it louder might make it less real or more real. He couldn't decide which. "Pull the personnel file," he said. "Cross-reference with inactive status codes and last known assignment." The database took longer than it should have. When the file appeared, it came with flags and redactions, the kind that indicated a story the Air Force preferred to keep in filing cabinets rather than active memory. The photograph showed a woman in a flight suit, standing in front of an F-16 with her helmet tucked under one arm. Her expression carried the particular exhaustion of someone who'd proven something they shouldn't have needed to prove. The date stamp read 8 years prior. The status marker read, "Separated, honorable, personal hardship." Reeves scrolled down to the notes section, where someone had typed a single line in all caps before the file was archived. The major read it aloud without inflection, each word landing in the quiet tower like spent brass on concrete. Primary caregiver, single parent, no dual military support structure. Separation approved under Family Exemption Clause Delta 7. The radar signature banked hard left, executing a maneuver that would have grayed out most pilots. Whoever was flying that aircraft knew exactly what they were doing. The major reached for a different radio, one that bypassed standard channels and connected directly to the alert hangar where the real operators spent their nights. When he spoke this time, his voice carried something between a question and a prayer. "Wake up, Thunder. Tell them Falcon's painting on the scope." The line crackled with background noise, the sound of someone moving fast, boots on concrete, the metallic clang of a locker slamming shut. Then a voice came through, rough with sleep but sharpening with every word. "Say again your last. Falcon's been dark for 8 years." The major looked at his screen, at the impossible signature still dancing through restricted airspace with a precision that made his chest tight. "Not anymore. She's up, and she's flying like she never left." The story that unfolded over the next weeks would become the kind of thing people told in ready rooms and bar corners, the kind that got embellished and argued over. But the core remained solid because too many people saw it happen. But that morning, in the tower at Nellis, all anyone knew was that someone had just announced themselves back into Air Force airspace with a flight profile that was half challenge and half homecoming. Reeves, still processing what he was seeing, made the mistake of asking the obvious question. "Sir, how is someone who's been separated for 8 years flying a military aircraft in restricted airspace at 0:30?" The major didn't answer immediately. He was watching the signature complete a split test that would have made test pilots nervous. When he finally spoke, his words came measured. "She's not flying a military aircraft, Lieutenant. Check the civilian registry." Reeves switched databases. The tail number that appeared made him blink twice. It was a privately owned L-39 Albatros, a Czech trainer jet that civilians could legally own if they had the money, the rating, and the particular kind of determination that turned weekends into flight hours. But the way it was being flown had nothing civilian about it. This was tactical maneuvering, the kind drilled into combat pilots until it became reflex. The major leaned back in his chair, and for the first time that night something like a smile touched the corner of his mouth. She's been working nights at the contractor Airfield across the valley, maintenance crew, single dad hours, nobody's first choice shift, pays the bills, keeps her close to the flight line. He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried the weight of understanding. But she's been logging hours, private time, building back what she lost when she had to choose between the cockpit and her kid. The signature climbed vertically, inverted, and carved through the desert sky with a grace that made Reeves forget to breathe. Across the base, in the alert hangar that housed the elite pilots of the weapons school, call signs like Thunder, Blade, and Reaper were pulling on flight suits with the kind of urgency usually reserved for scrambles. But this wasn't a scramble. This was something else. Major Cole Thunder Haverson, a man who'd flown combat missions over 3 continents and earned commendations he kept in a drawer rather than on display, was moving with a focus his wingmen recognized. When Thunder moved like that, something significant was happening. He keyed the internal hangar net, his voice cutting through the pre-flight chatter. "Listen up. Falcon is airborne. If you don't know who that is, ask someone who was here in 2017. If you do know, then you understand why we're spinning up." The hangar went quiet. The younger pilots exchanged glances, confusion evident. But the older ones, the ones with enough years to remember, they knew. Captain Nina Blade Torres stopped mid-step on her way to her aircraft. She turned slowly, her expression shifting from readiness to something deeper. "Falcon, Elena Constantin," Thunder nodded once. "She's painting in the corridor, flying a civilian L-39 like it's an operational asset. Somebody needs to go up and remind her that showing off in restricted airspace gets you violations and phone calls." But his tone suggested that wasn't really what this was about. Blade's face softened in a way that had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with memory. She had to separate. Her daughter got sick, really sick. The kind where you don't get to be a weekend parent. She chose family. Nobody held it against her. Thunder checked his harness clips with practiced hands. "I know. I signed off on her last flight eval. She was one of the best pure pilots I've ever flown with. But that was 8 years ago. People move on. They take different jobs. They build different lives." But even as he said it, Thunder knew that wasn't the whole truth. Elena Constantin hadn't moved on. She'd adapted. There was a difference, and it was the kind pilots understood in their bones. When you had aviation fuel in your bloodstream, when you touched the edge of what human beings could do in 3 dimensions, you didn't just walk away. You carried it with you, a weight and a gift, waiting for the moment when circumstances allowed you to reach for the sky again. The she was flying was a testament to that truth. It wasn't a fighter, but in the right hands it could simulate enough of the experience to keep the edge sharp. And Alina's hands had always been the right hands. Thunder climbed into his F-16, going through pre-flight checks with automatic precision while his mind worked through what he was about to do. The protocol was clear. Intercept, identify, instruct the civilian aircraft to exit restricted airspace, file a report. But protocols didn't account for 8 years of absence, for nights worked in maintenance hangars, for a pilot who'd sacrificed her wings so her daughter could have a mother. Protocols didn't account for the fact that Falcon's flight profile was flawless, that every maneuver she executed demonstrated skills that should have atrophied but clearly hadn't. He lifted off into the pre-dawn darkness, the desert floor still invisible below, the stars above sharp and cold. His radar found her immediately. She was holding station at 15,000 feet, orbiting a fixed point with the kind of precision that came from muscle memory older than thought. Thunder keyed his radio, using the tactical frequency rather than the standard civilian band. If she was who they thought she was, she'd be monitoring it. "Civilian aircraft in restricted corridor Delta 7, this is Thunder 11. You are in violation of active airspace. State your intentions." The radio crackled. For a moment, nothing. Then a voice came through, female, calm, carrying an accent that softened the consonants. Russian heritage, American training. Thunder 1-1 Falcon acknowledges. Apologies for the intrusion. I was testing a theory. Thunder brought his F-16 into formation, sliding into position where he could see the L-39's profile against the lightning sky. The jet was immaculate, maintained with a care that spoke of personal investment. He could see the pilot's helmet through the canopy, the oxygen mask obscuring features but the body language familiar. Falcon, you've been dark for 8 years. Testing theories in restricted military airspace isn't the comeback I expected. There was a pause. When she spoke again, her voice carried something between humor and challenge. I didn't realize I needed permission to remember how to fly, Thunder. Or is the Air Force claiming ownership of skills even after separation? It was the kind of response that would have gotten a civilian pilot a formal reprimand and a stack of paperwork. But Thunder found himself grinning despite the protocol violation. This was the Alina he remembered, competent, confident, and unwilling to apologize for excellence. Falcon, you're still pulling 6G turns in a training jet at 0-30. That's not remembering. That's maintaining. What's the real story? The rolled inverted, a purely unnecessary maneuver that demonstrated control so precise it bordered on arrogant. Then she rolled back upright, settling into smooth flight as if she hadn't just casually defied physics. My daughter turned 18 last month, Thunder. Graduated high school, got accepted to college with a full scholarship. For the first time in 8 years, I have my mornings back. I have my nights back. I have myself back. Her voice carried weight that had nothing to do with G-forces. So I bought a jet. I got current on my ratings, and I decided to see if I still had it. Turns out I do. Thunder flew in silence for a moment, processing words that carried years of sacrifice compressed into simple sentences. Alina Konstantin had been on track for the weapons school, for command slots, for a career trajectory that ended in stars and legacy. Then her daughter Myra had been diagnosed with a condition requiring constant medical attention, specialized treatment, and a parent who could be present rather than deployed. The Air Force had offered accommodations, but accommodations in military aviation meant grounding, meant desk jobs, meant watching others fly while you processed paperwork. Alina had chosen separation instead. She'd chosen to step away entirely rather than remain in the community but diminished. Now Thunder understood what he was seeing. This wasn't a joy ride. This wasn't even a violation, not really. This was a declaration. This was Alina Konstantin announcing that the years hadn't dulled her edge, that motherhood hadn't erased the pilot, that absence from the cockpit hadn't meant absence of skill. This was her way of saying, I'm still here, I never left, I just changed altitude. Falcon, Thunder said carefully, you know I have to report this. You're in restricted airspace without clearance. That's going to generate paperwork. Her response came immediate, unapologetic. I know, but Thunder, it was worth it. Every form, every violation citation, every phone call from some colonel who's going to lecture me about regulations. Worth it, because for 20 minutes I was Falcon again. Not Alina the maintenance tech, not mom working night shifts. Falcon, and that's something I needed more than I can explain. Thunder understood. Of course he understood. Every pilot who'd ever had to choose between the air and something else understood. Exit the corridor, Falcon. Head west toward the civilian field. I'll escort you out, he paused. And Falcon, welcome back, even if it's unofficial. The banked gracefully, pointing toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to paint the desert gold. Alina's voice came through one final time, softer now, the bravado stripped away to reveal something more vulnerable. Thanks, Thunder. Tell the squadron I said hello. Tell them Falcon remembers. Then she was gone, accelerating away with a precision that made Thunder shake his head in grudging admiration. He watched her shrink into the distance, a single point of silver against the warming sky, before turning back toward Nellie's. When he landed and filed his report, he kept it factual and dry, noting the violation but also noting that the pilot demonstrated exceptional skill and maintained safe separation throughout. He knew it wouldn't stop the administrative process, but he could at least ensure the record reflected the truth. What Thunder didn't expect was the response from higher up the chain. By noon, his squadron commander had called him into the office, and the conversation that followed changed everything. "Thunder, I read your report on the intercept. This pilot, Constantine, she was one of ours." Thunder nodded. "One of the best, sir, had to separate for family reasons. Medical situation with her daughter." The commander leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "I made some calls, talked to some people who remember her. Her record was exemplary. The separation was handled with full honors, but it was listed as a significant loss for the pilot program." He paused, studying Thunder's face. "How did she look up there, honestly?" Thunder didn't hesitate. "Like she never left, sir, maybe even better, more controlled, more precise. Like she'd spent 8 years thinking about every maneuver and was finally getting to execute them." The commander nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. "We have a contractor position opening up. Advanced tactical instruction for the weapons school. Civilian role, meaning flexible hours, no deployment requirement, but full access to training scenarios and aircraft. It's designed for retired pilots who want to stay connected without active duty commitments." Thunder's eyes widened slightly as he understood where this was going. "Sir, are you suggesting?" The commander cut him off with a raised hand. "I'm not suggesting anything yet, but I am asking you to reach out to Ms. Constantine, informally. Feel out whether she'd be interested in coming back in a capacity that works with her life now. She clearly hasn't lost the edge, and we could use someone who remembers what it's like to fly with something to lose." It was unprecedented, and Thunder knew it. The Air Force didn't typically recruit people back after 8 years of separation, especially not into specialized roles. But the shortage of experienced instructors was real, and the need for pilots who could teach rather than just fly was growing. If Alina could do both, if she could bring her skills to bear without sacrificing the family commitments that had caused her to leave, then everyone won. Thunder made the call that evening. Alina answered on the third ring, her voice carrying the background noise of an airfield at dusk, wind and distant engines. "This is Alina." Thunder kept it simple. "Falcon, it's Thunder. I have something you need to hear. Are you sitting down?" There was a pause, then a laugh, surprised and cautious. "I'm standing next to a fueling station watching the sun set over the flight line, so no, but I'm listening." Thunder explained the offer, laying out the details without embellishment. Civilian contractor. Tactical instruction. Access to operational aircraft for training purposes. Flexible schedule. No deployment requirement. As he talked, he could hear her breathing change, could imagine her processing each detail, weighing it against the life she'd built. When he finished, the silence stretched long enough that he thought the connection had dropped. Then Alina spoke, and her voice carried the weight of 8 years compressed into a single breath. "Thunder, are you telling me I can fly again? Really fly? Not just private hours in a trainer, but actual operational aircraft with actual students?" Thunder smiled into the phone. "That's exactly what I'm telling you. The position would have you working with weapons school candidates, running adversary scenarios, teaching tactical employment. You'd be in the cockpit regularly. And because it's a contractor role, you control your schedule. You can be home when Myra needs you, and in the air when the Air Force needs you." The silence this time was different. Thunder could hear her moving, could hear the change in background noise as she stepped away from the flight line and into the relative quiet of a hangar. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion she wasn't bothering to hide. "I need to think about this. I need to talk to Myra. She's going to college, she's starting her own life, but I need to make sure she knows this isn't me abandoning her for the cockpit. That was never what the choice was about, and it's not what this is about now." Thunder understood. "Take your time, Falcon. The position isn't going anywhere for a few weeks. But Alina, you scared the hell out of half the base this morning and impressed the other half. That flight profile you flew, that wasn't luck. That was 8 years of muscle memory refusing to die. We need pilots like that. The Air Force needs pilots like that." Alina laughed softly. "I'll call you in 3 days. That enough time?" Thunder confirmed it was, and they ended the call. He sat in his car in the parking lot outside base housing, watching the last light fade from the western sky, and thought about second chances. The Air Force wasn't known for them. The military in general operated on forward momentum, on replacement rather than reclamation. But sometimes, rarely, the system recognized that losing someone like Alina Konstantin was more than just a personnel change. It was a loss of institutional knowledge, of skill refined over thousands of hours, of perspective earned through sacrifice. 3 days later, Alina called back. Her answer was yes, but with conditions. She wanted the contract to specify that family emergencies took precedence over flight schedules. She wanted it in writing that she could decline assignments that conflicted with significant events in Myra's life. She wanted autonomy over her instruction methods, trusting that her 8 years away had given her perspective the active duty instructors might lack. The Air Force, to Thunder's surprise, agreed to all of it. Within a month, Alina Konstantin returned to Nellie's Air Force Base, not in uniform but in a contractor's flight suit that looked identical except for the insignia. Her call sign remained Falcon, though some of the younger pilots didn't understand why until they flew against her in training scenarios. Then they understood immediately. Alina flew with an economy of motion that came from experience and necessity. She'd spent 8 years unable to afford wasted time, wasted energy, wasted opportunity. That discipline translated into a flying style that was aggressive but never reckless, creative but never undisciplined. She could outposition pilots half her age not through superior reflexes, but through superior thinking. She knew where they'd be before they did because she'd flown their patterns 1,000 times in her mind during the years when her hands couldn't touch the stick. Her first session with a weapons school class became legend. She'd walked into the briefing room without introduction, pulled up a tactical scenario on the screen, and asked the students, all of them experienced pilots with combat deployments, to identify the correct response. They'd offered textbook answers, quoting doctrine and accepted tactics. Alina had listened patiently, then demolished every suggestion with clinical precision. Not because the answers were wrong, but because they were insufficient. "You're thinking like pilots who have nothing to lose," she'd said, her accent lending weight to words that might have seemed harsh otherwise. "You're flying like the aircraft is the most important thing in the scenario. It's not. You are. Your ability to return, to fly again tomorrow, to bring your skills to bear in the next engagement, that's what matters." One pilot, a captain with a sharp edge to his voice, had challenged her. "With respect, ma'am, we're taught to complete the mission. That's the priority." Alina had looked at him with an expression the older instructors recognized immediately. It was the look of someone who'd learned through loss rather than theory. "Complete the mission and survive, Captain. Both. Not either or. The military spends millions training you. Your squadron spends years building you into a tactical asset. Your family spends decades loving you. All of that is in the cockpit with you. So yes, complete the mission. But do it in a way that gets you home, because dead heroes don't teach the next generation." The room had gone very quiet. The captain had nodded slowly, the edge gone from his posture, and Alina had moved on to the next lesson as if she hadn't just redefined their understanding of what it meant to be excellent. In the air, she was even more impressive. The first time she flew adversary against a four-ship of weapons school candidates, they'd been briefed that their opponent was a contractor with extensive experience. They'd expected someone competent but rusty. What they got was a masterclass in tactical aviation. Alina flew the L-39 like it was a fifth-generation fighter, using every advantage the nimble trainer offered. She'd lured them into bad positions, exploited their mistakes with ruthless efficiency, and demonstrated that experience and intelligence could often overcome raw performance. When the debrief came, the lead pilot had been stunned. "How did you do that? We had every advantage. Better aircraft, better sensors, 4 against 1. You shouldn't have survived the first engagement." Alina had smiled, the kind that didn't reach her eyes but carried satisfaction nonetheless. "You flew like you were flying against an aircraft. You should have been flying against a pilot. The machine matters, but the mind matters more. And I've had 8 years to think about every tactical problem I ever encountered. You gave me exactly the openings I expected because you flew exactly the way doctrine teaches. Doctrine is good. It keeps you alive, but it also makes you predictable." The debriefs she led became the most valued sessions in the training cycle. Alina had a gift for breaking down complex engagements into teachable moments without destroying confidence. She could show pilots their mistakes while simultaneously showing them the path to improvement. It was a balance many instructors struggled with, but Alina had learned it through necessity. Motherhood had taught her to correct without crushing, to challenge without breaking. Those skills translated perfectly into tactical instruction. Word spread beyond Nellie's. Other bases heard about the contractor pilot at the weapons school who flew like she was still on active duty, who taught with an intensity that transformed good pilots into exceptional ones. Requests came in for Alina to travel to other installations, to brief their squadrons, to fly adversary missions against their best pilots. She accepted some, declined others based on Myra's schedule. True to the contract terms, family came first. But when she was available, when she could commit to a training mission or a briefing, the results were consistently remarkable. Thunder watched her reintegration with quiet satisfaction. He'd made the right call recommending her, and the results vindicated every unorthodox step they'd taken to bring her back. But what satisfied him most wasn't the professional success. It was watching Alina reclaim a part of herself she'd thought permanently lost. She smiled more. She laughed more. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd found balance rather than compromise. One evening, 6 months into her contract, Thunder found Alina in the hangar after hours. She was performing a walk-around on the L-39, checking every panel and rivet with methodical care. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Falcon, didn't expect anyone here this late." Alina glanced up, flashlight in hand. "Just checking everything before tomorrow's mission. Old habits." Thunder leaned against the fuselage, crossing his arms. "You've exceeded every expectation, you know that. The students love you. The evaluations are off the charts. You're making us all look bad." Alina laughed, the sound echoing in the empty hangar. "I'm making you look good, Thunder. You took a risk on someone who'd been out of the game for 8 years. That's on you." Thunder shook his head. "You took the real risk, coming back after building a completely different life. That takes courage." Alina set down the flashlight and straightened, meeting his eyes. "You know what the hardest part is? It's not the flying. The flying is easy. The flying is like breathing again after holding your breath for years. The hard part is forgiving myself for ever thinking I had to choose in the first place. I could have fought harder to stay. I could have demanded accommodations, could have leveraged my record, could have made them work around Myra's needs." Thunder's expression turned serious. "No, you couldn't have. Not really. The system doesn't bend that way, not for pilots in operational billets. You would have ended up grounded in some administrative role, watching everyone else fly while you pushed papers. You made the right choice then, and you're making it work now. That's not something to regret, that's something to be proud of." Alina nodded slowly, but Thunder could see the weight still there, the years of wondering what if. Every parent who'd ever chosen family over career carried that weight. The wondering if they'd given up too much, if they'd lost too much of themselves in the process. "Myra knows, you know," Alina said quietly. "She knows what I gave up. We never talked about it directly, but kids aren't stupid. She figured it out. Last week she asked me if I resented her for it." Thunder waited, giving her space to continue. "I told her the truth, that I resented the choice but never her. That I hated having to pick between being her mother and being Falcon, but that if I had to do it again, I'd make the same decision. Because she needed me, and need trumps want every single time." Thunder nodded. "What did she say?" Alina smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "She said, 'Good, because now you can be both, and that's better than either one alone.' Then she showed me her college acceptance letter and asked if I'd teach her to fly someday." The emotion in her voice made Thunder look away, giving her privacy in the moment. When he looked back, Alina had composed herself, but her eyes were bright. "So that's what I'm doing, Thunder. I'm being both. Some days it's hard. Some days I feel like I'm failing at both. But most days I feel like the luckiest person alive. I get to fly, I get to teach. I get to watch my daughter become herself. And I get to be Falcon again. Not the version who had to choose, but the version who figured out how to do everything that matters." Thunder pushed off from the fuselage and clapped her shoulder once, the gesture carrying everything he couldn't put into words. "The squadron's talking about you, you know. The ones who remember you from before. They're saying Falcon's back and better than ever. That's not a small thing. Alina locked up the L-39 and pocketed the flashlight. Tell them Falcon never left. She just changed altitude for a while. But she's been keeping her instruments calibrated, her skills sharp, and her eyes on the horizon. Because once you're a pilot, you're always a pilot. The rest is just details. They walked out of the hangar together into the Nevada night, the flight line quiet around them. Above, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent and eternal. Somewhere out there, students were studying tactics. Somewhere else, Alina's daughter was beginning a life that didn't require constant medical intervention, finally healthy enough to chase her own dreams. And here, on this desert airfield where dreams and discipline intersected, a pilot who'd never really stopped being a pilot had found her way back to the sky on terms that honored everything she was. The story could have ended there, a redemption narrative wrapped up neatly with lessons learned and balance achieved. But Alina Konstantin's return turned out to be just the beginning of something larger. 3 months after she'd stabilized in her contractor role, an incident occurred that would cement her legacy beyond anything she'd accomplished before. A weapons school student, call sign Rookie despite 4 years of operational flying, got into trouble during a training mission. He'd been pushing hard, trying to prove himself worthy of the school's reputation, and had extended beyond his fuel reserves in a simulated engagement. By the time he realized his mistake, he was 20 miles from base with engines flaming out and insufficient altitude to guarantee a safe ejection trajectory over populated areas. The radio calls that followed were the kind that made everyone on the frequency stop and listen. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Rookie 1-1, dual engine flameout attempting restart. The tower's response was immediate. Rookie 1-1, understand dual flameout, state intentions. There was a pause filled with the sound of labored breathing and warning alarms. Negative restart, I'm committed to ejection. I have civilian structures below. Request clearance for emergency vectors. Alina had been airborne in the L-39, running an independent training sortie 10 miles south. She'd heard the initial mayday and was already turning toward Rookie's last known position before the tower could coordinate a response. Her voice cut through the frequency traffic with calm authority. Rookie 1-1 Falcon, I have you on radar. What's your fuel state and hydraulic status? Rookie's response came strained. Falcon, I'm showing 0 fuel flow, hydraulics are degrading. I've got maybe 2 minutes of flight control authority left. I need to punch out. Alina's L-39 had fuel. Not much, given the training profile she'd been flying, but enough for what she was thinking. Rookie, listen to me. You're 20 miles from base, you have 2 minutes of control authority, and there's a clear approach corridor to emergency runway 03. You can glide this. There was disbelief in his response. Falcon, I've never dead-sticked an F-16. The glide ratio doesn't give me 20 miles. The math doesn't work. Alina was already calculating angles and distances in her head, the kind of mental arithmetic that fighter pilots did unconsciously after thousands of hours. The math works if you fly it perfectly, and I'm going to talk you through perfect. Do you trust me? The question hung in the air while Rookie wrestled with a decision that could mean the difference between walking away from his aircraft and becoming a statistic. Every instinct trained into him said, eject now, don't take chances, the aircraft is replaceable, you're not. But something in Alina's voice, the certainty, the calm, the absolute confidence, made him hesitate. I trust you, Falcon. Tell me what to do. Alina's voice took on a rhythm that pilots recognized, the instructional cadence that broke complex tasks into manageable steps. First, confirm your best glide speed. You should be seeing 210 knots indicated. Trim for that and hold it like your life depends on it, because it does. She watched her own instruments, calculating his position relative to the field. Rookie, I'm coming up on your 6 o'clock. I'm going to fly formation with you. You focus on the speed, I'll handle navigation. The tower interjected, protocol demanding acknowledgement of the unusual situation. Falcon, be advised you are entering an active emergency pattern. Confirm you have adequate fuel for your participation. Alina's response was clipped. Tower, I have adequate fuel to see this through. Unless you have another plan for getting Rookie on the ground without a multi-million-dollar smoking hole, I suggest you clear the pattern and let me work." There was a heartbeat of silence, then the tower's reluctant acknowledgement. In the command post, Thunder had been monitoring the frequency and was already moving toward his own aircraft. But he knew Alina was right. By the time he got airborne, this would be over one way or another. Better to let Falcon do what she did best. Alina slid into formation beside Rookie's F-16, close enough to see the pilot's helmet through the canopy. The aircraft was descending in an unnatural glide, sans engine thrust, a multi-million-dollar glider with the aerodynamic efficiency of a brick. But a brick with wings and control surfaces, and that meant it could be flown. "Rookie, I'm on your right wing. Check your angle of attack indicator. You want to be riding the edge of optimal lift-to-drag. Too slow and you sink like a rock. Too fast and you eat up distance you can't afford to lose." She could hear him breathing, controlled but heavy, adrenaline and fear mixing into a cocktail every pilot knew. "I'm showing 18 degrees angle of attack. Is that right?" Alina checked her own instruments, doing the mental comparison between her L-39 and his F-16. "That's right. Hold it there. Now let's talk about what you're going to see. The runway is going to look impossible at first. Your brain is going to tell you there's no way you'll make it. Ignore your brain. Trust the math. Trust the aircraft. Trust me." They descended together, two jets in silent tandem, one powered and one gliding on borrowed altitude and precision flying. Alina narrated every milestone, every checkpoint, turning the emergency into a training evolution that Rookie could process despite the fear. "Coming up on 15 miles. You're doing good. Speed stable. We're on the extended center line. This is going to work." The tower provided distance calls, their voices professional but tight. Everyone knew what was at stake. A successful dead-stick landing in an F-16 was rare enough to be remarkable. A student pulling it off, talked down by a contractor pilot in a training jet, would be unprecedented. At 10 miles, Rookie's voice cracked slightly. "Falcon, I'm sinking faster than predicted. The numbers aren't matching the profile." Alina had expected this. The F-16's glide ratio degraded with altitude loss, a cruel reality of aerodynamics. "I see it. You're going to have to extend your speed brakes at 5 miles. It's counterintuitive, but it'll steepen your approach and give you better glide control in the final mile. Trust it." Rookie acknowledged, though his tone suggested he thought she'd lost her mind. Speed brakes increased drag. More drag meant more sink rate. How could that possibly help? But Alina knew what the textbooks didn't always teach clearly, that a controlled high-sink approach was better than a shallow, uncontrolled glide that left you short of the runway. At 5 miles, she gave the call. "Speed brakes now. Half extension." Rookie complied, and the F-16's descent steepened dramatically. For 5 seconds it seemed like Alina had just killed him, that the aircraft would impact short of the field. Then the new glide profile stabilized, and suddenly the runway was no longer an impossible goal but an achievable target. Alina's voice carried satisfaction. "See it? You've got the runway made now. Retract speed brakes in 30 seconds. We're going to coast this thing right to the numbers." The final 3 miles were flown in focused silence, both pilots riding the edge of physics and possibility. At 1 mile, Alina gave final instructions. "Rookie, on short final you're going to flare slightly and let her settle. No engine means no go-around option. You get one shot at this. Make it count." Rookie's response was steady now, fear transformed into focus. "Copy, Falcon, one shot." The F-16 crossed the threshold at exactly the right altitude and speed, a tribute to Alina's guidance and Rookie's nerve. The touchdown was firm but controlled, and the aircraft rolled out on the runway with emergency vehicles pursuing behind. When it came to a stop 3,000 feet down the concrete, Alina could hear Rookie's breathing over the radio, ragged with relief and residual adrenaline. "Falcon, I'm down. I'm safe. The aircraft is intact. Jesus Christ, we actually did that." Alina peeled off, circling once over the field before heading to land herself. Her fuel state was lower than she'd admitted to the tower, low enough that her own landing would need to be immediate and precise. "Rookie, that was all you. I just gave you the map. You flew it. Be proud. That's a story you'll tell for the rest of your career. The debrief that followed drew senior leadership from across the wing. Saving a student pilot and a multi-million-dollar aircraft through nothing but skilled instruction and calm communication was exactly the kind of outcome the Air Force valued. But what impressed the commanders most wasn't the technical execution. It was Alina's decision to commit her own aircraft and fuel state to a rescue that wasn't officially her responsibility. She'd been on a routine training flight. She could have monitored the emergency and let Rookie eject safely. Instead, she'd chosen to risk her own fuel margins to give him a fighting chance. When a general asked her why, Alina's answer was simple and devastating. Because 8 years ago, when I had to separate, I made a choice to preserve something important at the cost of something I loved. Rookie was facing the same choice: eject and preserve himself at the cost of his aircraft, or try for something harder that might save both. I knew how to make that choice, so I helped him make it too. That's what instructors do. We show people how to save everything that matters, not just the easy things. The general, a man who'd flown combat missions in 3 wars and wore his experience in the lines around his eyes, nodded slowly. Ms. Constantin, you're doing more than instruction here. You're changing how we think about what matters. The Air Force needs more of that. Alina's response was characteristic, respectful but unbending. The Air Force has plenty of it, sir. You just have to look for it in unconventional places. People who have had to make hard choices. People who have lost something and rebuilt. People who remember that behind every call sign is a human being with a family and a future. We're all around if you know how to find us. The general's aide made notes. Within weeks, the Air Force would begin reviewing its policies on contractor instructors, on pathways for separated pilots to return in meaningful roles, on recognizing that service came in forms beyond active duty. Alina Constantin's name would be attached to those policy discussions, though she'd never know it. In the squadron-ready room, the story of Falcon and Rookie became instant legend. The younger pilots treated Alina with a new respect, the kind that came not from rank or resume but from demonstrated skill under pressure. The older pilots, the ones who'd known her before, simply nodded with satisfaction. This was the Falcon they remembered, the one who made impossible things look routine. Rookie himself became Alina's most vocal advocate. He'd requested her as his personal instructor for the remainder of his weapons school training, and she'd agreed. Their flights together became master classes in tactical aviation, with Rookie absorbing lessons that went beyond maneuvers and doctrine. He learned that fear was acceptable if you converted it to focus, that mistakes were inevitable but recovery was a choice, that the best pilots weren't the ones who never faced emergencies, but the ones who handled them with grace. 6 months after the dead stick landing, Rookie graduated at the top of his weapons school class. During his graduation speech, he did something unusual. He called Alina to the stage and presented her with a patch his classmates had designed. It showed an L-39 and an F-16 in formation, with the words "Falcon's Wing" embroidered above. "This woman," Rookie said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd of pilots, instructors, and commanders, "taught me that excellence isn't about perfection. It's about showing up even when it's hard, fighting even when you're scared, and helping others even when it costs you something." She gave up this uniform so her daughter could have a mother. Then she came back and proved that sacrifice doesn't mean surrender. She's still the best pilot most of us will ever fly with, and she's the reason I'm standing here today. The applause that followed wasn't polite ceremony. It was genuine recognition from a community that rarely gave praise lightly. Alina accepted the patch with quiet dignity, but those who knew her well could see the emotion she was carefully controlling. This was vindication not just of her skills but of her choices, proof that the 8 years hadn't been wasted. Proof that different paths could lead to the same destination. That evening, Alina called Myra from the squadron building, standing outside under the stars that had witnessed so many of her flights. "Hey, Mom," Myra answered, background noise suggesting she was studying in her dorm. "How'd the graduation go?" Alina smiled into the darkness. "It went well. Rookie gave me a patch. The squadron made me cry, which I'm pretending didn't happen. Standard day. Myra laughed, the sound warm and healthy, so different from the labored breathing Alina remembered from years of hospital visits. I'm proud of you, not just for the flying, though that's cool, but for figuring out how to be yourself again while still being my mom. That's harder than any tactical problem. Alina felt her throat tight. You made it easy, sweetheart. You're healthy, you're thriving, you're becoming everything I hoped you'd be. That gives me room to be Falcon again. We did this together. There was a pause, comfortable and full. Then Myra spoke again, her tone shifting slightly. Hey, Mom, remember how you said you'd teach me to fly someday? Alina's heart stuttered. I remember. Are you saying someday is now? Myra's excitement was evident even through the phone. There's a flight school near campus. I checked the requirements. I'm old enough, I have enough saved from my summer job for the first few lessons, and I have a really exceptional instructor in mind. What do you think? Alina looked up at the stars, at the infinite sky that had called to her since childhood, and felt something settle into place. The cycle completing, the skills passing forward, the legacy continuing not through institutional memory but through actual memory, parent to child, pilot to pilot. I think that's the best idea I've heard in years. We'll start next month. I'll teach you everything I know, and then you'll surpass me because that's what's supposed to happen. And someday, when you're an instructor somewhere, you'll teach someone else, and the chain will continue. 3 years later, Alina Constantin stood on the tarmac at Nellie's as a different kind of ceremony unfolded. The Air Force, in a rare move that reflected changing attitudes towards service and sacrifice, was unveiling a new training initiative. It was designed to recruit and retain experienced pilots who needed flexibility, who had families or commitments that made traditional active duty impossible, but who still had skills worth preserving. The program would be named for someone who embodied its principles, someone who'd proven that absence wasn't abandonment and that return was possible. Thunder, now a colonel and commander of the weapons school, stood at the podium with Alina beside him. Behind them, a cloth-covered sign awaited revelation. The Air Force, Thunder said to the assembled crowd of pilots, instructors, and leadership, has always prided itself on excellence. But excellence comes in many forms, and sometimes we've been too narrow in how we define it. We've measured it in flight hours and deployment cycles, in time spent rather than skills maintained. Today, we're acknowledging that some of our best pilots might not be the ones who never leave. They might be the ones who left and came back, who found ways to stay sharp during years away, who chose family without abandoning service. He gestured to Alina, who stepped forward with the easy confidence of someone who'd stopped apologizing for her choices. Ms. Constantin represents a model we're now embracing formally. Pilots who separate for valid reasons but maintain their skills, who contribute to their communities while keeping their edge sharp, who return when circumstances allow and bring perspective we desperately need. This program will create pathways for pilots like her to come back in meaningful roles, with flexibility that honors their commitments outside the cockpit. Thunder pulled the cloth away from the sign. It read, Falcon Initiative, Flexible Return Pathways for Experienced Aviators. Below the title was Alina's call sign rendered in the same style as operational squadron patches, a tribute and a challenge. Alina looked at it for a long moment before speaking, her accent giving weight to words she'd obviously prepared carefully. I never expected this. I separated thinking my flying days were over, that the choice between family and cockpit was permanent. I was wrong, but only because people in this community made space for a different kind of return. She turned to face the crowd, making eye contact with pilots young and old, active duty and contractor. To anyone out there who's faced the same choice I did, who's had to step away from flying for reasons that matter more than career, I want you to know something. You're not done unless you choose to be done. Skills can be maintained. Edges can be kept sharp. And if you come back, if you find a way to return, this community will recognize what you bring. Not just the flying skills, though those matter, but the perspective, the maturity, the understanding that excellence means balance, not sacrifice. She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried emotion she didn't bother to hide. My daughter is in the crowd today. She's a student pilot now, working on her private license before she starts officer training. She's choosing to serve, knowing what it cost me, and knowing that the Air Force is trying to build something better. That's the legacy I'm proudest of. Not the hours I've logged or the students I've instructed, but the fact that my daughter believes service is possible without destroying the things that make service meaningful. Myra, standing in the crowd in a flight suit that fit her like a promise, smiled with tears on her face. The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing off the hangars and dispersing into the desert air. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed and the official photos were taken, Thunder found Alina standing alone by the L-39 that had become as much a symbol as a tool. "How does it feel?" he asked simply. Alina ran her hand along the fuselage, the metal warm from the Nevada sun. "Like I finally stopped owing anyone an explanation. For 8 years I felt like I had to justify separating, like I had to prove I hadn't quit. Now I don't. This program, this initiative bearing my call sign, it says what I've been trying to say all along. There are many ways to serve, many ways to be excellent, and the best pilots are the ones who figure out how to do it all, fly and love and build and teach, without letting any part of themselves die." Thunder nodded, understanding completely. "The program's going to change things, you know. We're already getting applications from pilots who have been out for years. Some of them are extraordinary talents who left for the same reasons you did. They maintained their skills privately, stayed connected to aviation, and now they have a pathway back. That's because of you." Alina shook her head. "It's because the Air Force was finally willing to admit that rigid career timelines don't serve anyone. I just happened to be the example that made the case obvious. But Thunder, make sure the program actually works. Make sure it's not just publicity. Make sure the pilots who come back through Falcon initiative are treated with respect, given real responsibilities, and allowed to balance their lives the way the program promises. Because if this becomes just another recruiting tool that doesn't deliver, it'll do more harm than good." Thunder extended his hand, and Alina shook it firmly. "You have my word. We've already designated 3 positions at different bases. We're working with the contractor community to standardize the approach. And we're making sure squadron commanders understand that flexibility isn't weakness. It's smart management of human capital." They stood together in companionable silence, watching aircraft take off and land in the eternal cycle of military aviation. Somewhere overhead, students were practicing maneuvers Alina had flown thousands of times. Somewhere in the pattern, a pilot was learning lessons Alina would teach next week. And somewhere in the future, Myra Constantin would take everything her mother had taught her and build something new, carrying forward a legacy that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with refusing to quit. The sun was setting over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber that made everything seem possible. Alina breathed it in, this moment of recognition and arrival, and felt the weight she'd carried for 8 years finally lift. She was Falcon. She'd always been Falcon, and now the Air Force knew it too.